Hi everybody, in this video I wanted to share with you how you can create this cute little embroidery frame. I'm going to be using a Polaroid, but I have attached a link to where you can download this design for a 4x6 photo or for a standard Polaroid size. So I just wanted to document a little bit of how to do this. It's very simple and I'm just going to use a few basic stitches to create the design. So let's get started. For this design, I'm going to be using a Polaroid picture here. So I'm going to be using a 9-inch embroidery hoop. If you are doing the 4x6, you will most likely need a larger size hoop, probably at least a 10 or an 11-inch hoop for that size. So I have selected a couple of colors. These are just ideas if you want some, but I'm using 3777, 3053, 972 and 712 for my colors, and I'm going to keep the stitches very simple. I'm going to be doing outline stitches for this entire piece for the most part, and I've already hooped my fabric here. I'm using this nice mustard yellow fabric. It's Kona cotton fabric. So to get started, you're going to want to place your fabric in the hoop. And it's really important with this project that you have it hooped the exact way you want the finished design to be positioned, because the design is sized perfectly so that we can stitch the little areas to hold the corners of the Polaroid perfectly. So if you don't hoop the fabric in the way that it's going to be when you're finished, it could end up skewing the design and the size of the little holders for each of the corners. So you want to make sure that when you hoop your fabric, the weave of the fabric is perpendicular and vertical with the hardware of the hoop. It's lined up nicely. You don't want any wrinkles, and you also don't want to overstretch it to where you see the weave of the fabric starting to distort. So you want it to be tight like a drum, but you don't want it so tight that it's going to disturb the fabric. The other thing that you can do is make sure that your hoop is extremely tight, and if you need to, if you're working with a fabric that is notorious for sliding around on the hoop, you may also want to double up your fabric, or you can bind the embroidery hoop. I will leave a link to a tutorial how to do that. That just helps to grip the fabric a little bit better. The next thing I'm going to do is transfer my design. I'm using my iPad. You can use a sunny window or a light box to do this, and I have attached the link in the description to the pattern that you can download. The pattern prints on standard letter paper, but you just want to make sure that you measure and maybe place the photo over top of the design to make sure it perfectly fits before you transfer your design over, just in case your printer settings are a little off. Once you have made sure that the design fits perfectly with your Polaroid or a photo, you can set that aside for now. Next, I'm going to be transferring my design. I'm going to be using a friction heat erasable pen for this. I'd prefer not to have to wash anything away, so I'm just going to do that. For the design, you don't necessarily have to transfer the outline of the square. I would just transfer the little corners and the rest of the design around it. This is more just for sizing to make sure that it prints out okay. Once you have transferred your pattern over, it is time to flip the hoop back around so that the print is on the front of the hoop. And I like to make sure again that I'm really making sure the position of this is good in the hoop before I get started. And also, this would be a good time to pick up your photo again and just make sure that the fabric is positioned in a way that it will fit in this design. So I'm just going to double check that everything is good before we get started. Just for good measure, I'm gonna make sure that this is completely screwed tight. And then I'm going to lay my photo back in here. It actually is not quite where it needs to be. So I fixed the weave of the fabric a little bit, but it's still ever so slightly off, which can happen. I think the top points are okay. It's these bottom ones that are a little bit off. So what you can do is just kind of use your photo as the reference point once you're happy with the tightness of the hoop, which, let me make sure this is good. You can go back through and just kind of correct a few of those lines on the fabric to make sure that they line up okay. So these points are pretty good, so it's right here. I need to draw this to be a little bit wider. Yeah, so this should be like right here. And then this side, I'll need to move over a little bit too. So I'm gonna add a little bit of a line right here. So I have went ahead and just kind of revised these marks. I'm using a heat erasable pen, which is pretty much mostly removable. This might show through a little bit if there's any lines that are remaining, but the photo will cover it up, so I'm not super worried about it. One thing I did forget to mention about these pens are that they're great to use, but you have to make sure you cover up all the lines, especially if you're using darker fabric, because they can leave ghost lines when you iron them off. So they are removable to a certain extent, but sometimes there's a little bit of it, they can be a little tricky. So you always want to make sure you're careful with these markers, with the pens. I did go ahead and pick another color, which is 754, because I want to do something lighter for these little corners here. So that's the first thing I'm going to get started with. I'm going to embroider those corners, and I'm going to go ahead and cut off a strand here, and I'm going to use 4 strands for this, and I'm basically just going to make satin stitches across each of these corners, and I want to make sure that this fits nicely in them. I'm going to start on the corner here and go all the way across. And for this part, you really want to make sure that you are keeping the edge pretty neat, and you want to make sure that you're going on the line or a little bit outside of the line you marked with the Polaroid or the picture, because you want to make sure that the inner portion of these lines you're able to fit the postcard in photo. I keep saying the wrong thing. I'm going to just make a few of these stitches evenly spaced out along here before I commit to fully filling everything in, because I just want to make sure that the corner is going to fit okay. So these do require a little bit of trial and error sometimes. So now I'm just going to make sure that this fits nicely and it doesn't seem like it's too small or too large, and it looks like it seats in there pretty nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and finish filling in this corner, and I'm just going to do that for each of these corners. I finished the top 2 here, so again I'm just going to double check that everything fits nicely. It did a moment ago before I filled in the second one. Yeah, there we go. So far so good. I might add a few more stitches to this one just to make them even looking, but the main thing is that they fit all the way up in the corners here. One other option I wanted to mention with this, because this is kind of tedious sometimes to get this exactly perfect, is you can also just add in some stitches along the edge here, like across right here, instead of filling it all the way in, and that leaves you a little bit more margin of error if they're a little bit off. So if you want to do that, that's totally fine too. This is just kind of a fun project and you can run with it. All right, it's the moment of truth. Let's see if this works. So to get it all in, sometimes you have to bend, ever so slightly bend the photo for it to fit, but it shouldn't be too terribly hard. Uh-oh, that didn't work very well. Sometimes this can be a little tricky. There we go, look at that. Perfect fit. So that works perfectly. So now we can move on to the actual embroidery. I would suggest removing this again just for this portion, because you don't want to scratch up the photo with your needle or get it dirty while you're handling this. So I would say take this out, but we'll move on to the next part. I'm going to use dark red for the outline of the strawberries, and I've decided to use 4 strands. I want it to be somewhat of a bold line, but I don't want to do anything too crazy. So I'm going to split stitch the outline of the strawberries, and I'll show you how just in case you're not familiar with that stitch. You're going to come up through the fabric and you're going to make one single stitch. Then you're going to split that stitch down the middle with your needle. And now you're just going to move forward one stitch length. And then you'll do that again. You'll split up through it. And then you just repeat this. And I think that it's easiest to keep the stitches pretty small when you're doing this, because if you make them too long, sometimes the stitch starts to get kind of jagged. So I would recommend just keeping your stitches pretty small for this. So I've finished all of the outlines of the strawberries. So next I'm going to use my yellow floss. I'm going to use 4 strands, and I'm just going to make little straight stitches in each of these strawberries. So I'm going to keep it very simple and just literally make small straight stitches in each of the strawberries, and I think it'll look pretty cute. I filled in all of the strawberry seeds, so now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the leaves and the tops of the strawberries. And for this, I'm just going to use a back stitch. So I wanted to quickly go over it just in case you weren't familiar with it. You're going to come up through the fabric and you're going to make a small straight stitch. You're going to skip ahead a stitch length along the outline and come up through the fabric. And then you're going to come back down right at the end of that first stitch. And then you'll skip ahead again a stitch length. And then come back down at the end of the stitch. And again, I like to keep these stitches pretty short, especially around curves. It makes the curves a little bit smoother looking. So just really slow down and make sure that you are making even and short stitches along these lines. And then for all of the points of the leaves, you want to make sure that the stitches are ending along the points. So you're not crossing over the points, you're ending the end of 2 stitches to form that point. And that will ensure that you have nice sharp corners. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill in all of these leaves with the back stitch, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the strawberry tops as well with the back stitch. For this next part, I'm going to fill in the flowers. I'm using 4 strands of off-white, and I'm going to split stitch around the petals. The final thing I need to fill in on this design is the stems, and I'm going to use a stem stitch and use 2 strands of green thread. So let me walk through how to do it. You're going to come up through the fabric, and I'm going to keep my working thread to the left side. You'll take your needle down, you'll do 2 stitch lengths of however long you intend to make this stitch, and hold to the left side. You're going to come up to the very middle of the 2 stitches and pull through. Now the next one, you're going to skip down a stitch length, and you're going to come up at the end of that last stitch, and you're just going to keep the working thread to the left hand side the entire time, and you just repeat this all the way down the line. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. It was a really fun one. If you like these styles of tutorials that are more step-by-step and process videos, I have a ton of exclusive videos on my Patreon. There's a good variety of thread painting tutorials, and there's also a tier for pet portrait tutorials. So please check that out if you're interested. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.